Hi, I'm Gary McLouth, co-producer and host of today's authors. Today we're at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference on Sanibel Island in Southwest Florida. And we're hoping to get in some good conversation with the creative artists who've come here to conduct workshops and to do readings. One of the things I've noticed about creative types is that they like to go inside rooms, close the doors, and call them workshops. And the rest of us, unless we're in the workshop, have no idea what's going on in there. So the real purpose of talking with a few of these people is to find out what's going on inside the workshop, that hallowed space where creative minds get together and talk about things like structure and style and dialogue and onomatopoeia and other things like that. So stick around. Maybe we'll learn something. I certainly hope so. Andre Dubusse III has agreed to talk with us for a few minutes about his upcoming workshop, and I hope some of his work. Andre, welcome.
Hey, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too.
So you've got a craft talk coming up at the Sanibel Island Writers Institute in a few minutes.
Yeah.
What are you planning on doing?
Well, you know what's kind of interesting for me is they've assigned me to do the creative nonfiction talk because my latest book is a memoir, Townie. And although I consider myself to be primarily a fiction writer, but what I find intriguing about this whole thing is that I'm not going to talk about anything different. That's not to say you can make up your memoir, you can't, but you use the exact same tools, I think, to write a memoir as you would a novel or a short story or novella. So I'm going to spend a good chunk of the first part of the class talking about authentic curiosity. It's something I talk about a lot. I think that too many people go into the writing of a story, be it nonfiction or fiction, you know, gripped with a story to tell. Too much so, I think, gripped with a story to tell. And I find that, and then again, you know, you work with whomever you work with, you find out things that works for them. But for me, the writing that seems to have been most successful artistically that's ever come out of me was really when I was gripped, not so much with a story to tell, but with a story to find, where it was much more an active, deep exploration. And ironically, that's even true of memoir. You know,
is going back and selecting scenes that stand for your memory of life rather than trying to pretend you had all the facts lined up.
Yeah, and that's
like an obituary.
Well, exactly like an obituary. That whole notion of the facts versus the truth. You know, I would submit to you that we both could sit here and say how we got here. We were born on this day, and you know, broad brushstrokes how we got here to this day, years later. But just because we know what happened doesn't mean we know what the hell happened. And so this, you know, there's a great line from Tim O'Brien. He says, you know, memory has its own story to tell. So I'll be talking about that.
Yeah, that resonates nicely, that memory has its own, you're discovering what you're remembering.
Yeah. And you're right, what you leave and what you leave out says something about you.
And what do you think about when things get translated into another genre, like House of Sand and Fog, a novel which you wrote, it has just some wonderful sensory feeling to it, especially around the place where the guy was storing or the woman was storing all of her household goods.
Well, that's right, the storage shed.
Yeah, I love that, where she met the guy. When that gets translated into film, what happens to you as the writer, and you see that there's different nuances and maybe a different focus? Well, the ending was certainly different.
Yeah, what happens to you as a writer is you get asked to take a walk. See you later, bye. And I actually think that's fair. I think the writer should be very careful about whom he or she gives the option to. Because it's when you give the option that you're actually choosing someone's artistic vision. And it should line up, I think, fairly loyally with the book. Although I also think you don't want to hamstring a filmmaker. I mean, I really take that word based upon, literally, this movie's based upon this novel by so-and-so, and it's a stepping off point. Now, I don't think it should step off too much. At least for me, I don't want to step off too much. You know, if I've written a tragic ending, it better be a tragic ending in the damn movie. And so with House of Sand and Fog, I feel really lucky because it was loyal to that dark arc of that novel, although it is different, you're right. But I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. I think it's a loyal adaptation, and I'm grateful it happened.
Well, it's that great series of misunderstandings, it seemed to me. That the language barriers and what some people thought and meant and thought they were saying weren't what other people were hearing.
Yeah, well, you know, it reminds me of a beautiful line from Flannery O'Connor essay, and she says, "A writer's beliefs are not what she sees, but the light by which she sees," which is great, right? So, you know, as a fellow writer, you can read over some of your work and you can start to see what you believe and what you're afraid of. It's a great self-educator. And one of the things that I realized I believed when I finished writing House of Sand and Fog, and I actually think it's through a lot of what I've done in my writing life, I don't believe in good guys or bad guys ever. You know, I think my theology is, and from a Tom Waits song, Heart Attack and Vine, there is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk. That's my thought on that.
Is that sort of how Townie goes?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, you know, Townie was an accidental memoir, but I had no intention of writing a memoir. It was actually writing an essay about baseball. And the question filling the essay was, how is it that my sons taught me baseball when they got into baseball? How come I wasn't playing baseball? Because I love the sport. And as I wrote myself into that question, I wrote what I was doing instead of playing baseball, which was living with a single mother in first world poverty and being the new kid and getting beat up and then snapping and becoming a fighter and living a violent life until, frankly, creative writing got me off that path. It sounds talk show reductive to put it that way, but it's the truth, though.
Yeah.
You know?
And
it does, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know,
it does. It's a little
sort of like, you know, let's summarize this for Oprah, you know, so we can then put the book
It's a little
up.
too, thank you. It sounds that way to me, too.
But but the truth of that is in there.
I think so.
It's sort of, how do you write yourself out of your present life? I mean, how do you stop going in a direction you feel is wrong for you? And I think that's one of the things that maybe these people come to a conference like this for. Is they're looking, they've already got the bug, but they're looking for the direction.
You know, I'm so glad you brought that up, Gary, because I'm always deeply moved by conferences like this. Because people who show up at these places 9.5 times out of 10 aren't just dabbling. They've got some pretty serious intent and desire, as most people in any art form do, to create something true and beautiful. And I take my role as just one of the instructors pretty seriously. What I find fascinating too is, frankly, it's a mysterious process, this storytelling thing.
Yeah.
It's mysterious that we need them as people every generation. But what's not mysterious, as you know, is there are tools that are as concrete and tangible as a block plane is to a carpenter, as channel locks to a plumber, and those can be taught. And so I work really hard on trying to impart some of those tools, and then it's up to the people who've come.
Then you got to have people use them.
Then you got to, and that's the distinction. That's, you know, people say, "I'm a writer." I say, "Well, can you go?" And this is not my original thought, but I think this is the good question to ask. Can you go a year or two without writing and feel fine? Yes. Well, you're probably not a writer. Big deal. You're supposed to do something else.
Yeah.
If you can't go 2 or 3 or 4 days without writing, without feeling screwed up, then you're a writer whether you want to be or not.
It's like having sort of a disease, right, that you can't get rid of. You're born with this condition.
Yeah, just, deal with it.
Your thyroid's not working. What are you going to do about it? Well, you got to go see somebody and take the right drug. In this case, it's writing somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I like that.
Well, that's great. I couldn't have asked a better question myself.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
Congratulations on your work.
Thank you, sir.
I'm looking forward to getting into Townie, too.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting into yours, too.
Okay. We will. Thank you. Bobby Pyron is with us, children's literature author, and really curious about how one approaches a workshop with people who want to write or who are writing children's literature. Bobby, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. And we're really glad you're here. I mean, the conference only has one children's literature writer, apparently.
That would be me.
So you're it. So whatever's going on.
No pressure.
Yeah, no, don't feel any pressure at all. the main question really is how you conduct the workshop. And you go into the room and close the door, and you're in there with all these people who are either accomplished children's book writers or probably not. Some people want to do it. How do you approach that whole subject? What do you find are your major challenges?
I think when I conduct these workshops, it's kind of all over the map where people are in terms of where they are with their writing. You'll have people who just have started thinking about writing, and then you have people who have written quite a few things and perhaps have had some, have already submitted their work to some editors and agents. So a lot of times the real challenge, and I'm sure this is true for all workshop leaders and not just people who are doing workshops for children's authors, is trying to have things in there that will be helpful to the beginning writer and also to the more advanced writer. So everyone will feel like they are taking something useful away. I mean, my biggest fear as a workshop presenter is to have someone just be like, oh my gosh, this is a waste of time. This is all too much for beginners. Or for beginners to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. What am I doing here? What business do I have being here? Because I remember feeling that way as a beginning author. That's
interesting. So you've taken your own experience and extrapolated it into thinking about your audience.
Absolutely, because I'm not that far out from. My first book was published in 2009, so I'm pretty new at this.
But you've been writing for a long time. Haven't
I've been writing seriously for probably about 6 years. And had racked up my own big binder of rejections, but I just first got published in 2009, so up until then and even after then I was on the other side of the table in these workshops, and so I think I'm very conscious and very respectful of my students, because I was so recently, in their position, and I just want. It's just so important to me for them to feel like I don't have all the answers for one thing, but also to feel like there's something in there for everybody to take away.
Is there some kind of special exercise or method that you use to reinforce people's confidence? Something that works for you and works for them?
Yeah, I think probably one of the things that I try to do is tell them my own horror stories, because I think whatever stage at writing you are, or even being published, and even as a published author now, I've got 3 books under my belt. 2 of my books went to auction, which is a pretty big deal. It's so helpful for me to read an author like John Grisham say that he still thinks that somebody's going to discover he's a fraud, or Chaim Potok saying that he thinks his work is crap. So I think it's helpful for the students to hear me say, I really struggle with this aspect of revising. That's more what I talk about than anything else. And so this is how I deal with it. These are some of the techniques that I use.
Tell me a little bit about the revision process, because so many people, especially people who don't write, think that you just sit down and dash something off and then send it off, and if you're lucky it gets published. I don't even know if they think about luck, but the amount of revision that goes on in your work, how do you handle that?
I think it was Truman Capote said, the writing is in the rewrite. I really feel like that first draft is a very magical process, which is why I don't like to teach workshops on how to write or how to develop character or how to structure a plot, because I just feel like, it's kind of like Miles Davis said about jazz. You have to play what you hear and not what you know. You can't overthink things. But once you get to the revision process, then you have to use your mind rather than your heart. And so you have to revise and revise and revise I think it really varies from book to book as to how many times it is revised.
Yeah, so you're really talking about a pretty advanced level, aren't you?
In some ways, but some of the tips that I like to give in the workshops for revising are little things that people never think about. Like, for instance, when you sit down with your first draft after you try to get some emotional distance from it and some ego distance from it, because when you finish that first draft, you either think that you have succeeded in writing the great American novel, or what you wrote is total crap. And the truth is, it's somewhere in between. And so you get your ego out by taking 4 to 8 weeks off before you sit down and read it again. Hopefully you start something new. And then you sit down and you read it out loud. Because it forces your brain to see the story in a completely different way than you would ever see it by reading it silently. And so that is such a concrete tool in starting your whole revision process, is reading your book out loud and seeing what the rhythm of your sentences are. It really points out what your structure is like, where you're repeating words, where you're reading out loud to yourself a section and you find your brain wandering, or you're getting bored.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big red flag. That's a place you want to mark.
Do you give your work to other people to read, or to children? I mean, at some point your audience has got to give you some feedback, haven't they?
No,
I don't. Do that?
I don't.
Yeah?
I don't, because when I'm writing, I try to never have my audience in mind. I know that sounds weird, but I don't want to think about, is this for a 3rd grader or a 6th grader? Because that makes the whole writing process too self-conscious. And Ray Bradbury says that the worst thing that a writer can do is think. Because when you think, you become too self-conscious, and self-consciousness is the death knell of creativity. And so in that first draft, I try to never think about how old my reader is.
That's interesting. So in light of that, how come that what you write is called children's literature then? I mean, what characterizes it? If you're not really thinking about who the audience is, then how do you end up with children's literature?
I think it's because of the age of my main characters. Like, in A Dog's Way Home, the main character is 11 years old, the human character, and the issues that are being dealt with. Her love for her missing dog. But the thing that I love so much about children's literature are the issues that they're dealing with. They're looking at what is their identity within their family, but also separate from their family. Who are they separate from their peers? Whereas a lot of adult fiction is dealing, and this is probably a stereotype on my part, a reverse stereotype, but a lot of adult fiction is dealing with infidelity and more of those kind of issues, murder and robbery and deception and betrayal.
Yeah.
And whereas kids are really thinking about, what is my place in the world? Who am I separate from my parents? Who am I separate from? At a certain point, they're thinking about, who am I separate from my peers? And I love that. I love being able to explore those things.
Those are sort of basic thoughts, aren't they? Basic decisions in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really are.
Which, of course, we recycle as we get older.
Absolutely.
In different ways, but the questions are sort of the same.
And the interesting thing that I'm seeing, I'm also a librarian as well. I like to say I'm a librarian who just happens to write. And the interesting thing that I'm seeing in the whole reading world is the blurring of lines. You're seeing more adults reading young adult fiction, but you're also seeing more adults reading what's considered kids fiction. I attributed a lot of that to the Harry Potter books. For good or for ill, I also attribute that to the Twilight books. Unfortunately, you can edit this out if you want, but
Yeah.
well, a lot of adults, have wanted for whatever reason to read the Twilight books. I see a lot of adults coming in to the library reading the Hunger Games. So it's great because you're seeing a blurring of lines. Adults are willing to go into young adult fiction and even upper middle grade and read books that are, I think, more complex in some ways in terms of what they explore.
Well, it seems like a lot of our video games and a lot of our TV shows are more like children's literature in terms of their structure and how people relate to each other and stuff.
Yeah.
They're very simplistic in a sense.
Right.
And allude to things because of all kinds of laws and things, I guess, and taboos. But even as those break down, you realize, wow, I didn't really want to hear somebody say that on the air.
Yeah. I think that's true, but I also think there's just such amazing books out there for kids and teens. One that has really broken the barriers is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and that was released in Australia originally as an adult book, and when it jumped the pond and came over here, it's now a young adult fiction. But people of all ages are reading that book, and I love seeing that because a good story is a good story.
Yeah, that's the bottom line for stories, isn't it?
It is.
I wanted to just a couple more questions. One is the one that we sort of alluded to this in a conversation we were having before about how there's a hierarchy of literature, and children's literature is somehow seen as being at the bottom.
Yeah.
You didn't like that too much. What's your response to that?
Well, when we were talking before, I was saying how it's a lot of times when I meet people and tell them that I write children's fiction, the reaction is, well, are you not a good enough writer to write for adults? Or are you warming up to write, when are you going to write an adult novel?
Warming up, I like that notion.
Yeah, so, you're sort of, practicing, which is so not true because, kids they have such competing interests. There's so many things out there, computer games and all kinds of stuff. So you've really got to hook them. You've got to be I think a really excellent writer to hook a kid. So yes, it's a real different mentality. You have to say, well, I love writing for kids, and it's this is what I do.
That's a great point about having to hook a kid who's probably just overwhelmed with all kinds of other choices.
Oh, they're overwhelmed with other choices, and they've got soccer, and they've got schoolwork, and the kids are so overscheduled these days. When a kid takes out time to email me, like the email I got last night from an 11-year-old girl who was reading A Dog's Way Home, they take that time out to email me and tell me in great detail about what they loved about the book and what they hated about the book, and would I please write them back? You're never going to get that from an adult reader, and if you write adult fiction. It just blows me away.
That's wonderful. That's
They're
a great
the
experience.
greatest fans,
That's a great experience. Well, it's been great talking with you.
It's been great talking with you. Thank you very much.
Glad you came by. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, we're talking with Taylor Goldsmith about songwriting, one of the unique course offerings here at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming up. All right. So I'm curious about, what do you do as a songwriter and a musician and a performer and everything? What happens when you get around to talking with people about what you do and they aspire to want to do the same thing?
Well, this is actually the first writers' conference I've ever been a part of as a songwriter, and then I realized that Sanibel Island doing songwriting as a part of it is not that common. Therefore there's not a lot of people I can really call and be like, how do I kind of approach this thing? Like, so I kind of just went in and for me, because I understand it better than any other materials, I just went over my own stuff, you know, rather than like, you know, I hate to be the guy that like teaches out of his own textbook kind of thing, but I feel like, you know, my music is the only music that I was like there for the process of being written, so I feel like I could really explore, you know, each aspect of each section, you know, even if the folks there aren't really particularly into my kind of music or whatever, I feel like it would still give you know, insight into the aspects that I do understand, you know. Which
what do you start out with? I mean, do you start out with notes in your head, or you start out with lyrics, or? I
mean, like a lot of it for me is it's I feel like music is one of those kinds of is an art form that really relies on like the inspired moment, whereas a lot of other kinds of writing, I feel like you can kind of work structural or technical issues while you're waiting for the next idea as to where your story's going to go or whatever. Whereas I feel like with music, you're not really getting, there's so few words and these songs are so short that like each like there are definitely like structural technical kinks to work out, but I feel like there's not much, so you really have to be in like kind of an inspired place to be able to work. And so a lot of like getting started consists of just kind of being available to it and sitting at the piano or sitting at the guitar and like coming up with some sort of idea that I can work from. I mean, it's always, when it comes to the musical idea, I don't want to like commit too much to anything, because I don't want that to limit me in terms of what words I can use. So I really try to keep that broad until and then once the lyrics and the phrasing and the like, you know, the inflection of lines and all that presents itself, then I start to like commit a little firmer to like chords and tempo and so it's a little bit at the same time, but I've never like written words by themselves like before music, but I've also never really gotten too far along with music without words there.
So what kind of instrument do you use? I mean, do you sort of trip yourself? I mean, you play little, you know, musical notes and things and collections and sequences, and then words come to you, or how does that happen?
Well, I mean like a guitar and a piano kind of. Well, yeah.
What instrument do you really, you know, riff on?
Well, probably mostly guitar, but I also play piano and I also write on piano, and I find that using different instruments will like refresh certain things that might have otherwise seemed like a little bit tired or a little bit like just things that you feel like you've already explored, like the same exact chords, like a you know, C to F, like that might be something that a songwriter is very familiar with, probably used quite a bit. But then all of a sudden, if you just lower that a whole step and you're going from B to E flat, it's still a 1 chord to a 4 chord in both examples. But just by being in B flat, for me at least, I'm not in B flat very often. So it's like all of a sudden I can do these moves and these changes that I've done before, but all of a sudden I'm feeling inspired by them because just simply by changing keys or just going from the guitar to the piano and playing these same chords, but on piano, and then feeling a lot newer to me.
You know, it seems to me like to be able to get across to a group of people, like, I mean, if you're trying to get this across to me, for instance, I'm starting to feel like, well, I got to go to an instrument, or I got to see it, or I got to try it, or I got to hear it to really, you know, sort of translate what you're saying.
Right.
So is that how you?
Well, I have a guitar with me when I
show people, you know, what it is you're talking about.
Yeah, I have a guitar, so I can you know, when I talk about like the idea of like suspending someone's impression of a song, where like you kind of elevate them and even and you make it through the music, you make it sound like it's not resolved, that like you need to somehow conclude this thought. And like, you know, that can be through a certain chord choice, and I'll illustrate that on a guitar. I mean, like, you know, when you hear this guitar, it's kind of like, it feels like a big question mark, like it's hanging everybody up, and everybody wants to come down, and then that's what this chord is for, you know, and then I'll play the next chord.
Who do you use as your inspirational examples? I mean, if you're going to say, you know, like so and so does it, or like.
Well, it depends on like what I'm trying to to show, but like if I really want to show the powers of like that kind of thing, like suspension and resolution and theory and like and employing like really complex theory ideas, I will talk about Paul Simon, songs like "Still Crazy After All These Years," or Joni Mitchell has a lot of that. For me, I mean, like more like folk-based or traditional songwriting is kind of like what I do, so I don't really, even though like there's obviously classical examples and jazz examples of songs and works that are much more like musically involved than a Paul Simon song. Right. In my world, like if you're writing a 3-minute pop / rock and roll / folk song, Paul Simon's a really great example. But then when I want to talk about structures and all the different ways you can structure a song, where you want to put that title, how you want the chorus to flow, like where certain lyrics keep popping up. I'll talk about like Bob Dylan. Like he seems to have an example of like every type of structure anyone's ever done, and it's pretty actually astounding when you really like sit down and pay attention to that. Even though I'm not saying that he's better than anybody else or anything like that, but a lot of people find certain formulas and stick to them, whereas Bob Dylan, you always find yourself being like, wow, that's unlike anything he's ever done, and it's a very clear, concise structure.
So do you see yourself progressing in any kind of direction with your music? I mean, you talked about Paul Simon. He seems to have done sort of the same thing his whole career, but different themes and different subjects, picking them out, and Dylan changing so that people actually protest when he goes from one structure to another. And you've already gone through a lot of changes. Did you do the rock band thing for a while? Yeah, well, I still do that. Right?
I'm in a band. I don't make solo records. I write like maybe more traditional songs and folk songs, but I'm in a band, and that's how all the songs come out. But yeah, I mean, I do what comes natural, as I'm sure Paul Simon and Bob Dylan both do and did. Yeah, I mean, if it leads me to any like new forms and new sounds, then I'm really excited to follow that through. And if it really kind of keeps me, as some sort of representative of like one specific sounding genre, then that sounds pretty cool too. Because a lot of my favorite artists, like Bruce Springsteen or Tom Petty, like they stay very true to their initial sound.
Right.
And that's not really, I have no problem with that either.
So I got to ask you this one last question. Why did you come to Sanibel to do this? Have you got a curiosity about just trying it?
Yeah, I mean, I was invited, and I was really honored, because I'm working at it, I'm thinking about it all day, and even when I sat down to put together notes to go over with the folks coming to the workshop, like I have no experience as a teacher, and I'm learning to be more like engaging in that sort of thing, but in terms of like my willingness to talk about it and like just kind of go on and on about like all the different things you can consider, like it's so fun to me, and it's all I spend my time doing anyway, so I figure it'd be a really wonderful opportunity, and something that, and like anything you've never gotten to experience, it's just exciting.
Yeah, it really puts you on the line.
Yeah.
Taylor, nice talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Taylor Goldsmith. Christopher Schelling, a well-known agent, is with us. He's going to talk with us about his experiences here at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference. Christopher, good to talk with you.
Likewise.
Thanks for stopping by.
Sure thing.
So what's your role here? How's it? You're not the usual guy at a writers conference, but it's what we all come to find.
Right.
Where's my agent? Yeah. How do I get an agent?
Exactly.
How do I talk to this person?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now I'm one of 2 agents here, and we're doing a panel with editors and agents. So that should be interesting. We work together, but also work against one another in ways. And then I have individual consultations with writers who send 10 pages to me a couple weeks before, and I look at those and then sit down with them and talk about what, how it sort of fits into the commercial publishing world. I think there's a lot of, I think there are amazing writers here, and there's a lot of emphasis on craft, and they do come here to work with the other writers. My perspective is sort of what, assuming that it's going to be well written, already because they've been doing this work on it.
Yeah.
Is it commercial? Is it something that I would know how to sell? I think it's a completely different perspective on their work.
So what kinds of things are you looking for? I mean, you run into a lot of different submissions, I'll bet.
I do. I'm a generalist. I have a lot of, I mean, it's pretty well balanced between fiction and nonfiction. It's mostly adult. I have some young adult clients, but no picture books. That's just, it's a world that I don't really understand. So I'm very wide ranging. I mean, I like, different, I have some science fiction and fantasy clients. I have, a woman who writes, these fun romantic comedies. There are a lot of memoirists that I have. So it's a really interesting mix. I own my own company, so I can take on whatever it is that I want.
How do you market people? I mean, when you accept a manuscript or you decide, right, yeah, I want to work with you, then what do you do?
Well, even as I'm reading the manuscript, I'm thinking about which editors at which publishing houses I can send it to. That, to me, if I'm reading something and I feel like there are only 2 people I know who sort of, they might be right for their list or something, that's usually not something that I'll take on, because there's just too little chance. Rejection is the sort of the name of the game in some way. Authors get rejected by agents, then the agent submissions get rejected by editors. So I like to think that there are like a dozen editors that I can send something out to, and if I'm sort of getting that feeling and I know I'm compiling the list in my mind, that to me sort of feels like this is something I need to take on.
So you're willing to take a risk if it looks like it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is a conference like this helpful to your work? I mean, is this a better place to find good work than just getting it through the mail or giving talks? Why?
There's definitely a higher level of sort of writing with these things than a lot of the submissions I get. I mean, I have the sense that there are a lot of online services that people can sign up for, and it's like, we'll send your work to, all of these agents or something. So I get a lot of things that feel computer generated. And here it's very personalized. They also, it's knowing either they want to meet with me or with the other agent, sort of knowing what's appropriate for them. I've found clients here, but amongst the presenters, a lot, the faculty,
right,
that is,
right,
looking to change agents, or somebody who hasn't had an agent yet. So I haven't yet signed up a client from one of the participants, but that's always a possibility. I'm always on the lookout.
But the presenters are really fertile ground, aren't they? Because they're proven, they've gotten a track record,
right,
they put things together, you can count on them.
Right. And at this point, I find clients a lot more those ways, or friends of other clients, or I mean, some of my clients also teach, so they'll have students who they'll recommend to me, but also writer friends. And again, sometimes they're unagented, sometimes they've had an agent and they want to make a change. So that's mostly how I'm finding clients.
Now the question we all ask, of course, is we're always asking, do I have to have an agent to get published? Do I if I don't have an agent, how do I get from where I am to where I want to go?
Right.
To a readership and some sort of remuneration. What do you think about that? How's that work?
I do. If you're going to go the traditional publishing route, you absolutely need an agent. There are very, very few of the major publishers who will take unsolicited submissions at all. So it's never even going to get read. That said, there's obviously a huge self-publishing revolution going on. It's also interesting to me that for so long publishers were talking about, the middleman is going to get squeezed out here, and they were kind of talking about agents in a way, and the way it kind of looks now, it's the publishers. The authors are connecting directly to their audience, even the ones who have major publishers. Through social media, now it's people can connect with their favorite authors. They don't have to wait for every 2 years or something if they come to on a book tour to some major city that they have to get to meet their favorite writer. There's direct contact. And I think that's sort of the next logical step then with a lot of self-publishing. It's sort of like I have this audience who's ready for what I'm doing. So and for that you don't really need an agent. I mean, I've set up a separate company to publish ebook editions of my clients' work that has been out of print. So I'm making those available again. And for that, my clients are happy. They don't really want to be doing that themselves, sort of uploading it to every server, and it's easy enough for me. So yes, you do and you don't need an agent. You definitely need one to go the mainstream route.
And I'll ask a question, what do you like most about your work?
What do I like most? That I can do it in my underwear and have my dog in the office. I think that might be.
That's probably it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also that I was a young, precocious reader. I've always loved books, so the opportunity to work with really great people is, that might trump the underwear.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Christopher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for your time.
Sure.
Hi, Stephen Church is with us at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference. He specializes in nonfiction. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. We're curious about what goes on in these workshops. What kinds of things you do to get people cranked up. Why are they there? Why are you there? How does the relationship go? So,
sure.
What do you think? I mean, you've already done a couple of workshops.
Yeah, I've done a couple of workshops. What I try to do in the workshops usually is give the students some kind of generative writing activity to kind of get them started. Prime the pump a little bit, get the creative juices going, give them something to generate some material. Then I'll usually try to combine that with something that's focused on crafting that material, like taking it and turning it into something else. So the other day I did an activity based on a Mary Carr book, or a line from her book, which is my first memory is of a single instant surrounded by darkness. And so I asked the students to think of a sort of first memory, that single instant, and write about that. And then the next part of it, to sort of craft it into something, is to think of something in their present life that might echo that moment that they can talk about. And we're putting the two things together and creating some kind of relationship between those, and some reflection in the juxtaposition of things. Then we'll often in nonfiction, because of what it is, we end up talking about some issues of ethics, and what you can and can't do, how you write about other people, how you deal with people in your life as characters on the page, which are all tough questions to answer, but it's something that as nonfiction writers we kind of always have to deal with.
So I got to ask you that question, right?
Yeah, sure.
What is the difference? I mean, what kind of limitations have you got when you say this is nonfiction and you want to be very, descriptive in your language? How do you handle that?
There is no real easy answer, quite honestly. And actually, one of the things I like about nonfiction is that it can never set those questions aside completely. If you're writing fiction and poetry to some degree, you don't have to worry about that as much. You can just make stuff up. People know that it's fiction. They know that it's poetry. Even if there's some similarity between the characters on the page and people in real life, you say, hey, it's fiction. It's not you. They can, I guess, in some sense exist in a sort of moral vacuum. That doesn't really work for nonfiction. It is an art form just like fiction writing or poetry, but it doesn't exist in a moral vacuum. I think sometimes we like to think it does, but the reality is if somebody picks up a book and says nonfiction, they have different expectations for it, and some of those expectations are conditioned by things like, what's right, what you can and can't do, is this real or not? Yeah. I actually, what I told the students yesterday is your only obligation as a writer is honesty. Honesty doesn't really traffic in absolutes. So, you have to be honest, and you have to show everybody with all their warts and all their, the good side too. You have the same responsibility as a fiction writer or a poet to create well-rounded characters. But there's a sort of added weight because these are real people.
What's your favorite kind of thing to write about?
Favorite kind of thing to write about? Lately I've been writing these essays about sound, is what I've been interested in lately. So I have a piece, it was in the Best American 2011, where I'm writing about stethoscopes and the history of stethoscopes and how stethoscopes are used by doctors to establish their identity, and how for a father the stethoscope is the tool through which you have your first sensory relationship with your child. Your first relationship you have as a father with your child is through sound. They can hear your voice, you can hear their heartbeat. So that's some stuff I've been working on. It always ends up often these days back at writing about my kids. They show up on the page a lot. I'm also interested in kind of pop culture. I write about movies. I had a piece recently about Mike Tyson and the movie Blue Velvet and severed ears. So I'm sort of interested in strange things that somehow hopefully connect.
Yeah, which in a strange sense sounds like fiction, doesn't it?
Sometimes, yeah, it feels like fiction. In terms of the way it moves and the way it surprises me. But the thing about nonfiction, at least for me, is I was never really a very good fiction writer, because fiction writers, the best ones that I know, will say, at some point their characters start to take on a life of their own. They start to act and interact and surprise them and do things that they didn't expect. And that never really happened for me with fiction writing. But what happens is with nonfiction is the ideas that I'm writing about tend to start behaving like characters. They start to surprise me and start to change and do things that I didn't predict, and start to gather other sorts of information to them. They become what I call sticky. So like everything starts to stick to it.
Are these things difficult to translate to your students? I mean, in an intense series of workshops like this, how does all that work out? I mean, what kind of feedback do you get?
It's tough to get it all across to them in a short workshop. Really, you try to focus on sort of the few basic elements. I think in a setting like this, try to teach them some sort of fundamentals of writing, and kind of it's easiest if you can take like one specific passage. I read in the section yesterday from an essay and sort of talked about how the essay moves, how the ideas shift and change, and there's sort of different, like a piece of music, there's different movements in it, and I try to help them see how that essay works and how it's moving through there. Try to give them something really concrete, and hopefully they can see those lessons on the page.
Cool. Yeah. That's great. Well, thanks for coming in and talking with me. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Cynthia Williams is here to talk with us about her conference experience, Sanibel Island Writers Conference. Cynthia, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Glad you decided to talk with us.
Well, that's all right.
So how are things going for you? What do you expect out of the conference, and what are you getting?
I came because I wanted the opportunity to meet possibly with agents, editors, and so forth. I have a book I have written. I've been writing all my life, so I'm not, in the learning stage. I don't mean that I have nothing to learn, but what I mean is I'm a full-time writer and editor now. So what I'm looking for is the opportunity to find an agent, to find a publisher, obviously, and it's a networking opportunity for me.
So is it working out for you? Have you met some people?
I hope so. We'll see.
Yeah.
I've met some people. I've been able to show my work to a couple of people and who expressed an interest. So we'll see where it goes from there.
So what genre are you working at?
My book defies genre classification.
Oh, that's good.
It really does. It's a psychological mystery revolving around the tragic death of a brother and sister in 1908 on the occasion of the girl's birthday.
Really?
And it's a trilogy. Am I allowed to talk about my book?
Sure.
Well, I'm glad I did the interview.
Sure. Yeah.
It's the name of it is Banyan. It's the first in a trilogy, and at the end of each of the books, which is self-contained, you wouldn't have to read the trilogy. You believe you know what happened, but then when you begin the next book, you discover that, oh my God, maybe that's not what happened. And so at the end of the second book, you have the answer, you think, until you begin the third one. So not until literally the last page of the third book do you find the answer. It's undiscoverable until then. It's not possible to discover it.
So you really need to invest in the trilogy. You can't just read one of the books.
You can. You can. You then at the end of, you would have your answer at the end of each one, unless you start a new one.
But you're hoping that they'll be marketed
obviously
as a
one
trilogy.
wants to be read. Yeah.
When you say you've been writing your whole life, now how did you get started with writing? Is this something that you were born with? Is this something?
You know, it's an affliction you're born with. You have to do it. I've been writing not the way I would have preferred to be as an independent, you know, a self-sufficient writer publishing and living off that income. I wish I had. I've been employed in various ways that allowed me the opportunity to write. For instance, at the moment, I'm the senior writer and editor at a Fortune 300 company in their communications department. It gives me the opportunity to exercise the writing muscles, but of course it's not the writing that is, you know, what I have to do, need to do, want to do.
For yourself.
Yeah. But it's a wonderful opportunity to do some writing, and it's allowed me to hone my craft because you're often very restricted in your word count, which is good for me because I'm an excessive wordsmith. I mean, you use a lot of words. 4,000 for a 500-word article, and I have to cut it down.
Yeah. That's a lot of work. But you're an editor, right? So
yes.
How'd you learn to edit your own work?
Well, because I started out of college. I graduated with a degree in communications from UNC at Chapel Hill, and right out of college, I couldn't get right into television, which was my aim. My husband was stationed at Fort Sumter, and the only opportunity for me to work there was as a school teacher or waitress. So I chose. So I taught English grammar and literature and creative writing, and by teaching. Of course, when I went to school, we had to learn grammar. I mean, we had grammar from the first grade through the 12th, and we diagrammed sentences and all
right.
that. So, from my understanding, they're not doing that in schools anymore. So, the people I work with in communications, I'm literally their teacher. I give grammar lessons to adults in this company because they simply haven't had the experience. They don't know it.
I always thought diagramming sentences was the most fun.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I think we quit when I got to the 5th grade.
Yeah.
But that's how you learn how things go together.
Well, you understand not only how to do it, but why the rules are there. And I think currently people don't think it matters, so why learn it? But grammar is important to understanding sometimes what all these words mean. You can leave out a comma and change the meaning of a sentence.
Right, absolutely.
So anyway, but I taught English grammar. I was taught it. I taught it, so I understand it well enough to do that.
What do you find about the approach to writing at the conference? I mean, have you been able to pick up on where people's sensitivities are and what seems to be going marketable? How did, when you approach an agent, what is your pitch to the agent? Do you feel pressure to make a little synopsis of what your book is all about?
I was told I had to do that. I was told, you read, because the one thing a writer doesn't know, let's assume that he knows his craft. The one thing he doesn't know is how to market it or pitch it, usually.
Right.
And so I do a lot of research to find out, okay, what do I say, what do I offer, how do I do this? Because you've got that one chance with a person. And I was told you'll be lucky if you have 3 minutes, 1 sentence, maybe 2. So, I spent a lot of time working on that sentence before I got here. I've got it memorized, so I finally decided, it's so memorized that they're going to hear that it's memorized. So I'm just going to start out and say, just please be patient because I've memorized this, and if you interrupt me, I'm not going to get to the end.
So has that worked? Have you had a chance to try it?
No. I did.
Still memorizing?
No, I rehearse it every day before I get here. I've been tracking this one agent. I'm trying to track her down, but I hover around like a wolf around a campfire, when I see her.
Yeah.
And then I don't want to attack her because I know these people are working hard and they need a break. So when she walks away, I don't run after her, but it's my inclination to do so.
So your humility is in your way.
Yeah, absolutely. Courtesy.
Yeah. I've always wondered how to get at that question because I have the same problem. I'm a writer, and every time I get around somebody who might be able to help me, I mean, you have this idea that this person's going to help me because they're an agent, and then that writer-salesperson dichotomy kicks in, and I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I start to feel like I don't know what I'm doing.
Right, and I don't want to anger the person. So that's the last thing I want to do. So I've got my plan of attack. If I'm hanging around waiting to see her, I've got my plan of attack.
That's good. So she's unawares. That's great of you to talk with us about this.
You're
Thanks,
quite
Cynthia.
welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Appreciate it. We're speaking with Morgan, who's got a real history here with the Sanibel Island Writers Conference, and let's talk about that history. Tell me about your experience here. This is your, third season? Mm-hmm. And you've had several different roles. How's that worked out?
Well, one of the thing that I love most about the Sanibel Island Writers Conference is that I've only actually exclusively taken poetry workshops here, but each time you get a little bit of the poet's life in there. And I like that the best because you feel like you're in one of their classes. It's just like they're teaching every day at the university. And they give genuine responses to all of the things that you say. And they're gentle but firm. And that's one of the things I love too, because it's embarrassing. It's weird sometimes to share the thing that you've written on the page because you're not always expecting to. It's private. And then sometimes they ask you, and then it's not. But they still manage to make you feel comfortable, and I love that. Is
that your intention, is to keep it private, or it's someday not?
Well, I don't, I guess someday not, but part of what makes it private is that it comes from something that's deep and personal, so like a memory or just an emotion that you fixated on. And then the other thing that makes it private is that it's rough. You know, it's not polished yet, so you're not ready to share it because it's not perfect.
Yeah.
And then you have to.
Yeah. What's I'm curious about how a conference sets up its own environment and its own atmosphere, different from you would get going to a regular class on a regular campus. What is that true? I mean, that works for you like that?
I think I get to branch out at the readings mostly because I don't go to the other workshops, but there is something that you can take from every discipline and apply it to whatever genre you prefer to write. Like Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, we were talking about list poems today, and in The Things They Carried, which is not a poem at all, but structurally and in some of its motifs with lists and memories and things that remind you of deeper meaning, you can do that in a poem, and it's just as powerful. So there's a lot of interdisciplinarity, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great teaching piece, that The Things They Carried, about how that's documented and listed psychologically, physically. And then there's that emotional glue. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how does it feel to be among this coterie of writers as opposed to being in a bunch of liberal arts students?
I don't know that it's that different.
It's not that different?
What do you mean by liberal arts students in general?
Regular college students. You're on a regular campus.
Okay,
this is very focused, very,
Yeah. Sure, because when I think of liberal arts, I guess I mostly just think of the humanities, so
yeah.
I kind of feel a little at home here anyway.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess as a younger person and a person who has lived less, it's sometimes intimidating to interact with people who are older in the best way, because like they've lived more, they have more life experiences, they've figured out better ways to say things that are more powerful and universal than I can right now. And that's a little intimidating, but at the same time, it's wonderful to just be surrounded by people who have made it, and people who have made writing their lives. And that's really inspiring, and it gives me a lot of hope.
It makes you see that it's possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because again, young and inexperienced, and so it seems far away, but it's not, right, it's not impossible.
I was talking with one of the writers earlier, and he said, you know, a lot of times people wonder whether they're writers or not. And he was saying, you know, one of the tests is, well, how long can you go without writing before you start feeling crazy? Does that test work for you? I mean, you've got like a certain period of time that you can go without writing, then you find yourself having to do it?
You know, to be honest, the last time I wrote was at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference, so it's been about a year for me.
Wow.
For poetry. And then most of my other time, my I guess resources and energy gets eaten up with critical analysis since I'm an English grad student. And it's so different and so impersonal comparatively. So this has been kind of cathartic for me in a way that I didn't realize it would be until I got here, because it's been so long since I've written anything that comes from me.
Yeah, there's a big difference there, isn't there?
Yeah.
But you're writing just the same.
Yeah.
You're grappling.
Yes, there's always grappling, yes. That is the common thread, I would say. And then clarity is the other one.
Okay. Morgan, it's been great talking with you. Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay. Hi, we're with Lenore. She's one of the attendees at the Sanibel Island Writers Conference, and it's nice of you to talk with us, Lenore. So what brings you to a writers conference like this?
To inspire creativity in myself and be able to put things onto paper that I wouldn't be able to.
So you're looking for some inspiration from people, right? And are you finding it?
Absolutely. I'm finding a lot of inspiration here. I love this conference.
What is it about it that's appealing to you?
The presenters are all very approachable, and they have just a wealth of ideas. And I just enjoy it. I learn so much every time I come.
And you find that you're relating to it personally?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah?
Yeah, very much.
How do you apply the things that you're getting? I mean, give me an example of being in a workshop or a reading and what ends up happening in your head as a writer.
Well, I just went to a blogging workshop with Doug Harrison, and I learned what I was doing wrong with blogging. Basically, I'm a little too scattered, so I need to focus more and keep the topic to my blog focused. In other words, think like the editor of a publication. If you're thinking of putting repeated posts and you want people to come back and read it, then they're going to be expecting posts on a certain topic. So instead of digressing, I need to stay a little more focused.
Is there something about blogging that appeals to you as compared to other forms of writing?
No.
No?
No, they all appeal to me.
You like them all. So when you're blogging, what do? I mean, do you rely on poetry or do you rely on nonfiction?
No, it's nonfiction. I'm very interested personally in domestic animals and seeing that domestic animals have homes and that people are educated in how to take care of them once they get them, so they don't get returned to shelters or rescues or other places. In order for people to be successful, when I first got my rescue dog and was out looking for information, everybody was telling me to do something different. One person's telling me if he grabs onto your arm with his teeth, screech a little, and go like that, and they'll realize they're hurting you and they'll back away when they're puppies. I did that and he thought I was playing. Somebody else told me snap them on the nose. Somebody else told me roll them over and hold them down. Well, I wanted to know, what are the experts, what are the people who are writing the research saying now about how do you train a dog? It's a lot like education. Years ago, education was different. Now we teach, we don't smack rulers on the desks and,
Right.
and yell at everybody.
What's the latest with the dogs?
Well, with the dogs, it's positive and giving them treats and finding out what motivates dogs. Dogs also have different learning styles. So you have to learn what is going to motivate that dog to do what you were asking.
Have you found that, I know this is probably a crazy question, but do different types of dogs have different types of training that they respond to?
Yes, yes, they
and
do.
your job as the blogger is to figure that out for us?
No, my job is I will go out to academic journals, read the research, try to synthesize it and put it into some plain English and a little synopsis and say, now if you want more, here's where you find more of information about that. So that's what I'm trying to do with my blog.
So going to the conference has given you more focus? I mean, so you're able to define where you're headed?
Yes.
No, that's great. Well, my main reason for talking with you is to find out how this conference is working for you. So it sounds like it's going all right.
That's working great, yes.
Yeah. So how many times have you come back?
This is my third year here.
This third year, oh, that's wonderful. So you've got a track record.
The first year I came as a student, and I learned so much. And it's such a nice atmosphere, and everybody's so friendly. So I wanted to come back the next year, and I came back last year, and I volunteered and, you know, got involved a little more. And then this year I brought a friend along. So.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it continues to go well for you. Thanks, Lenore. Thanks for talking with me. Tyler Leffler is with us. She's actually participating in these workshops, and she's an English major at Florida Gulf Coast University. Welcome.
Hi.
Good to see you. Good, good. So you're signed up for this thing, right?
Yeah, I signed up for the class.
And you're really psyched about what?
I was mostly psyched about meeting Steve Almond, which I got to do today. That was probably the highlight of today so far.
So did that pan out okay?
It did. He gave us a few writing exercises during his part of the conference, during his workshop. And I got to see a side of him that I knew was there, but I couldn't just experience just by reading some of his books.
Oh, that's interesting. So you were attracted to doing a workshop with him because of his writing?
Mm-hmm. It's something that I actually take 2 classes with Tom DeMarchi. I have his narrative techniques class, which is not an online course, unlike the Sanibel one technically is. And he focuses, we actually had to buy one of his books for class, and he focuses a lot on Steve Almond, DeMarchi does. And I don't know if it's just because it's one of his friends or if it's just because he's such a talented writer, but I enjoy his essays a lot, so that was exciting.
So what were the exercises that he gave you?
The exercises, I took the nonfiction workshop because something I like to focus on is nonfiction. I'm hoping one day when when I have more life experiences to write a memoir. So his nonfiction workshop, he had us do a writing exercise in which we cornered one of our darkest moments. And he just wanted us to write it. He didn't want us to rush with it. He wanted us to slowly take our time. Like any of our like fears or just a bad experience we had that it's just too hard for us to either A, talk about, or B, it's like one of our, I want to say like the monsters in the basement kind of thing, just something we don't want to mess with. So we focused on that. That was the assignment he gave us. That was the writing exercise, was to write about that. And I started it, but I'm not done with it yet.
So the memoir attraction, memoir form, why is that?
Just because I think it's interesting reading other people's life perspectives, and I hope that maybe I have something interesting to convey to the world one day.
One day? How long is one day?
Well, I'm 20,
You're
so
20.
I don't know.
So you don't know.
I have too much time ahead of me.
But you could write a memoir right now, couldn't
Yeah,
you?
I probably could. I just on one life instance. I probably could on the one he asked us to focus on in the workshop. But
I mean, in the days when you couldn't write a memoir until you were old, those days are over.
I know. I actually, I know I'm probably jumping and not sticking to your questions, but I had another workshop in which we focused on memoirs.
Really?
Yeah.
So how did that go?
Well, it was with Stephen Church, and his memoir that I read for this class was A Day After, A Day After. It was about his experience in, I believe it's Kansas, after a lot of the bomb scares that went on during, not the bomb scares, but he grew up during the Cold War, and he wrote about that, and he was like expressing to us how there's no right way to write a memoir, and the best way he feels is if you kind of do it chronologically and just have like a timeline out in front of you. That way you can examine each moment as like you're reliving it, basically. Which was really interesting because I mostly just start writing. I didn't think about planning, even though you should plan. I just start writing, and that is probably one of my the bad things I do. I don't plan, and he stressed that.
Well, you're in the discovery process, right? You write to discover. Some people plan it all out. I just read a quote from some famous guy that said that's not the way to do it. I mean, if you're going to do an outline, what's the point in writing?
That's what you used to, well, for fiction, I can understand that, but if you're analyzing your own life, such as most memoirs do, that's, I think, why Stephen Church said to do an outline. Like, most cases you wouldn't, because, you know, it kind of stifles the creative process, but if you're going on your own life, it's probably best to do it that way so you don't leave something out, or well, yeah, you don't leave out important details, or makes you relive those memories. Interesting way to go about it. So how long have you wanted to be a writer? Honestly, for a very long time. I don't remember what the name of the book is called, but when I was like 4 or 5, when I was just learning how to read, my parents gave me this book called, I can't remember what it's called, but it has to do with the writing process, and it shows every step in creating a book, or how a book is made is what it's called. It's a children's book, and it goes through all the different processes, all the different jobs involved in making a book, editors, publishers, the writer, and I would probably say from then, when I read that, I was like, this seems really easy. That was my goal from like 5.
Yeah, so do you think it's still easy?
No, it's not easy at all. In fact, I think writing is probably one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do, and it's what I want to do. You know, because you really have to, there's a lot of self-examination involved. And that's what also I'm learning from this conference, is that I'm not the only person that is scared to write because of what they're going to experience, reliving their experiences. Another thing I learned from Steve Almond in his essays, you know, he really stressed going to those dark places.
That's really a great point. That can happen at any time in your life, too, let me tell you. I've been writing a long time. I still have those moments where you know if you're going to write about it, you don't want to go there with it.
Right, and that was that, and because there was only 2 workshops that I was able to go to today, because out of all the choices, and then I get to do more tomorrow and the next day and whatnot. But that was another thing that Stephen Church brought up, was you don't know what you're going to write until you write it. He called it our engines, the engines in our brain that keep us going. We're not aware of what it is, but say you start writing about a pink sunset and it ends up being about your dad, kind of situation. Like you just start writing and it just, you don't mean for what you're writing to turn out how it is, but it comes out that way. And that was another way to get at those monsters in the basement, was to just start writing.
It sounds like a really great exercise for getting the juices going. So if you write every day,
which is what most writers should do.
And you got a lot of pink sunsets.
Then you should probably start going into a different direction and see if you still get the same father ending. You know, just to see if that really is your quote engine that's pushing you.
I'm going to talk with him on Saturdays.
Yeah.
Is there any? Are there any with Steve Church? Are there any like little barbs I should slip in?
Barbs.
Questions.
I think you should ask him about his feelings on, I'm sorry, I don't know him personally, but I'm sorry, you can cut this part out.
That's all right.
I'm like at a blank. I'm not entirely sure, because he did a lot of talking. I think what I would probably want to ask him, so.
Well, as a student, how does the workshop guy comes in, the famous author, the person you've been reading, and they start talking about this, that, and the other thing, and how they write, and where they write, and why, and what you ought to do. What's your response to that? I mean, how does it make you feel?
Okay, I was really excited. I was excited, but also when he started talking about where some of his where some of his engines and some of his monsters were coming from. It seemed to center around a lot around his brother that passed away, and then his parents' divorce and stuff like that. And I just asked him mostly, how do you write without it always being about the same thing? Which is what we were also talking about, because that tends to happen. And he said that everything he writes about ends up being about the same thing in its core, and that's okay. And that was really relieving to me. I was happy that he said that. But it's just the different spins on everything. And I think that if you were to ask him a question, I think that you should ask him how he goes about making each piece different, even though it has the same core. You know, how does he go about doing that? That's what I want to know, because I've read a couple of his works, and I mean, it seems totally different, but he said, no, I felt I was writing from my heart about my brother. And I was like, oh.
That's a good tip. I appreciate that.
So.
I also appreciate you talking with us.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you very much.
No problem. It was exciting. Thank you.
Hey, Tyler.